Hi, welcome back to This is Getting Old. I'm your host, Melissa B., PhD, and today we're going to be talking about having the COVID conversation with your older relatives, and the principles would apply to having any candid conversation with an older adult. So, one thing to keep in mind during this COVID pandemic is that we've also seen a major outbreak of ageism. And, ageism is when you are prejudiced about someone or you have a stereotype about them because of their age alone. And it's a major problem globally. And I've been asked to do a couple of different interviews about how to convince our older relatives, what they need to be doing. And just even thinking that way is an ageist way to think about communicating with anyone. So, because even younger people can experience ageism. So, I think the first thing we need to understand is that older adults are all different. I think that for some reason, there's this perception by people that, all older adults are these old, disabled, feeble people, and they're all in nursing homes. And that's actually not true. 95% of older adults are living in their community. They're living in their homes. And at any given time, only 5% of people over the age of 65 are in our nation's nursing homes. So the majority of people who are older are handling their own business. So unlike with childhood, we see these developmental milestones. So first you crawl, then you walk, then you run. You're supposed to hit those milestones as you grow up. What happens with aging is that there's no one way to do it. It all depends on the choices that we make when we're young. Do we exercise? Do we get enough sleep? Are we eating the right amount of food? Are we maintaining a healthy weight? All of those lifestyle choices impact what we're going to look like when we're 85. So we've all seen, the senior Olympians, senior athletes, people doing yoga, bodybuilding. So all of those things matter. If you are sitting at home by yourself, and particularly right now, a lot of us are doing that, you still need to be up and moving. One of the worst things you can do is sit in a chair all day long. So this is why we have all these Fitbits now. So you still need to be getting, at least 10,000 steps a day, even if they're in your house, or if you can get out and walk and still be physically distant from other people, you need to be doing that. So all that said is just to let you know that you're going to have to tailor your talks with your older relatives based on what they're experiencing. And so things you want to think through are kind of some of the these are common health problems. People may have trouble with their functional ability, which means, how well are they able to move around? How well are they able to take care of themselves? There may be sensory problems, whether that's a change in hearing and vision, changes in cognition, so any changes to their thinking, to their memory, and their problem solving. And this may be the first time you've noticed any issues with that, and we'll talk a little bit more about what you need to do if you've seen that. And then what are all the emotions that this older adult's dealing with? I mean, stress and being stressed is the number one way to not remember anything. If you're trying to talk to someone who's super stressed out, they're not going to hear what you're saying. And so you may be seeing some behaviors just because that person, is having a lot of anxiety, or maybe they're depressed, or maybe there's some other unmet need. Typically, I think of when people are behaving badly, that's because there's some need there that's not being met. And so we need to figure out what that is. So one of the things with this physical distancing, and they call it social distancing, which I think is kind of a misnomer because it's really more about being physically distant. We need to remain socially connected while we're physically distancing. But, you think about, someone who's older, who doesn't have a lot of space to move around, this is going to impact their ability to stay strong and to be able to maintain, take care of themselves. So we need to encourage them to be physically active, to go out and walk each day, and to help them maintain their sense of autonomy and purpose. And so what that means is, if they were running their life before this pandemic, they should be running their life now. The worst thing you can do is try to take over, because that's just not going to go very well. And one key principle with communication with anyone really is that resistance is met with resistance. So I do this exercise in my NOSH training, which is dementia skills training. But if you have two people come up and push each other's hands together, when you push against somebody else's hand, their automatic response is going to be to push back. So if you have your agenda as maybe the child of an older adult, and you're trying to push it in their face, you're going to be met with resistance. And when you back off, they're going to back off. I mean, so it's just this normal part of human interaction and communicating with each other. So sometimes you just need to back off and not create resistance, even though you're well-intentioned. So if someone has changes with their hearing and vision, I've worn glasses since I was in the 3rd grade, and I've often told people that I don't hear very well if I don't have my glasses on. Just a thing. So making sure people have their glasses on, making sure they have their hearing aids in. You also have to talk slower and be patient to wait for the answer. So I often think of this as like interacting with a pinball machine. I ask my question to my older person, and then I have to wait for the words to go in, to kind of go around, and then wait for them to respond to me. So they're going to be able to talk to you, but you need to be patient, and you need to give them time to get their thoughts together so that you can have a conversation. Another common thing with aging, just because of all the different exposures that we have, is that they may have some high frequency hearing loss, which means they don't hear sounds that are higher pitched as well. So female voices, children's voices, they're not going to hear those as well. And so what you need to do is you need to lower your voice. So you lower your voice, you make your voice very low, you're going to talk slow, and then ask open-ended questions. So give them a chance to talk and to tell you what they know about COVID-19. Do they see themselves as being at risk for having severe illness? Do they understand how to minimize their risk of exposure? And then if you are trying to clarify information for them, you may have to repeat it. So that's one thing in geriatrics is I have to repeat myself a lot. So I have to repeat myself all the time. So then if you think that if they're having any issues with their memory or cognition, this is something you do need to report. In geriatrics, there's these things called the 3Ds. So depression, dementia, delirium. If someone was okay yesterday and they're not okay today, they don't have dementia. That's an acute change, a very quick change. That could be a delirium. And if they have a hyperactive delirium is when people are trying to pull out their IVs, or they're trying to crawl out of bed, or they're, doing things like that. That always gets a lot of attention. When people are sleeping in their chair and they're just, sleeping and they're confused, that is called a hypoactive delirium, but you need to pay equal attention to it. So if mama's not right today or daddy's not right today, that's what you need to pay attention to, and you need to report it, because they could be dehydrated, they could be malnourished, they could be sick. And this is true regardless of whether or not we were in a pandemic or not. This is just basic principles of geriatrics, and that's called atypical presentation of illness, and I talked about it in the last podcast. And then, thinking through somebody's emotional state, how stressed are they? Do they have adequate access to food? Do they have all their medications? Are they taking their medications? Are they staying in a routine, with their sleep-wake cycle? So these are all the things that we need to pay attention to help our older relatives. So when you're getting ready to have a conversation with your older relative, you need to think about where they're coming from. Ask them, are you having a lot of fear and anxiety about your risk of exposure, that someone's going to come over here and give this to you? I think you'll find people all across the board on that. Some older adults aren't worried at all. Other older adults are extremely fearful and anxious. And, so thinking about, your risk factors, but at the end of the day, the majority of us, even if we contract this virus, we're going to survive. And many of us won't end up hospitalized, but there's a large number that will. Are they depressed? The question to ask is, are you feeling sad and blue? And, and that's they probably are. We all are. We can't get out and engage with the normal things that we would do. Our normal support systems aren't there. If they went to the senior center, if they went to adult daycare, if they are used to just kind of getting in their car and going to do their thing. I mean, none of us can do that right now. And that will make you anxious and depressed. So, how do you help them connect to other people? I did a podcast on the Well Connected program. That's a great resource. They have support groups, they have educational programming, they have virtual museum tours, but help them get connected to their peers, and to help build their social network so that they don't feel like they're being a burden on you. And, it also would give you some relief to let them talk to somebody else. And really, if we can't get out and about and do our usual physical activity, that's also going to impact our mood. So we need to be aware of maybe what they're feeling, but then also what are we feeling as caregivers? So if you're caregiving with someone in your home for an older adult and your kids are not in school anymore, that's a perfect setup for everyone to be stressed and anxious. So, but even if you're having to caregive from a distance, that's also stressful. So what are the local resources in that community that you might be able to connect with to help you with some of these things? So the area agencies on aging, they're a great place to start. And you can go to it's called eldercare.acl.org to find out where the area agency on aging is in your community, to get connected to them for any services that might be of help to you. When we think about how different people get information, it would be helpful to ask your older relative, how do you get your information? Most older adults are either getting that through the newspaper. A lot of them are online, but sometimes they may have trouble figuring out what's accurate information for them, through the radio. So knowing that can kind of help you to kind of fill in the gaps for them. But again, you want to ask open-ended questions like, how do you minimize your risk of exposure? How do we reduce, the spread of this? What are the risk factors? And then whatever they don't understand, it might be helpful to use graphics or to find a video that can kind of reinforce that they do need to be respectful of this virus, but at the same time, you have to balance that with the fact that they are adults and they can take care of themselves. And if they do need to go to the grocery store to do something, they need to follow the same precautions that the rest of us are. Limit the number of times that you go. Make sure you have a mask on. Be sure that that you've got hand sanitizer on you, and that you're, washing your hands as soon as you get home. And they just have to follow all the same precautions. But there's absolutely no reason that they couldn't go to the grocery store, because we're all at risk for picking this up, and we all need to be following those same protocols. Other things to think about, for all of us, do you have your advance directives in place? And if you don't, you need to talk to people about what you would want to have happen at the end of your life. Just because you talk about it doesn't mean it's going to happen. And also knowing where that paperwork is and making sure that it's accessible in case you were to need it. I'd be aware of scams and talk to your older relatives about all the different scams that are out there. We did a podcast on COVID-19 and scams. The Special Committee for Aging in the Senate puts out a fraud book every year. So just becoming aware of minimizing your risk of that happening to you too. And if everybody's stressed, I know for myself, pretty early on, I had to limit my news intake to 1 hour a day. And now I'm like skipping days because I figure if something big happens, I'll find out about it. But it was just too much for me to deal with. And, I saw an article earlier this week, and it really hit home for me. I think that changing our metrics is really important. And this guy, Paul Ollinger, wrote this article, Your Only Goal is to Arrive, and it's become my little motto. And I found a magnet on my refrigerator this morning, and it basically said, I've had this thing for years, particularly I think I got it when my kids were little. At the end of the day, if my children are alive, I have done my job. And, maybe this quarantine isn't the time to try to write your memoir or write a best-selling novel or, take on some major project. Sometimes just getting through the day, you may not have, not all of your days are going to be good, but there's going to be good in every day. And so focusing on that, kind of giving ourselves permission to to do what we need to do just to survive, so that we come out the other side of this pandemic healthy, sane, alive, and kind. So being kind to each other, and maybe just lowering our expectations about what we need to be doing today, and just do the best that you can. So thank you for joining me today, and I will see you next time. Thank you for joining me today for This Is Getting Old. If you'd like to know more, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. And if you have any questions or a related topic you'd like to hear from me about, just let me know. Thanks.